There's a moment most men don't notice. It slips under the radar, masked as logic, coated in good intentions, disguised as reason. It's the moment you feel the need to explain. Not because you were asked, not because it was required, but because deep down, something inside you felt threatened. You wanted them to see your point, to understand you, to get it. And in that invisible split second, where the words rush forward, the clarification forms, and you start convincing, that's when the power leaves your body. It doesn't shout as it leaves. It doesn't cry. It just disappears. And you're left standing there, unaware you've just handed the frame to someone else. Most people believe that being understood is strength, that if they can just find the right words, the right tone, the perfect explanation, they'll win. But Machiavelli would laugh, because in his world, the man who tries to convince is already beneath the man he's trying to reach. If you need to be believed, you've already agreed that their perception matters more than your position. And once you've done that, the game is over before it began. It starts small, a sideways glance in a meeting, a raised eyebrow from someone you respect, a friend who challenges your opinion, a stranger online who calls you out. You feel the tension, you feel the pressure to respond, to correct, to clarify. And what do most men do? They start talking, they lay out their evidence, they explain their thinking, they say, no, that's not what I meant, as if that removes the stain. But it never does, because the more you explain, the more you reveal. And the more you reveal, the more you lose. Every time you try to win someone over, you're admitting you need them on your side. You're admitting their validation matters. And Machiavelli knew, in the world of power, dependence is death. He didn't write for the agreeable, he wrote for those who wanted to command. And those who command don't convince. They assert, they demonstrate, they allow belief to form around them, but never because they begged for it. They're not chasing alignment, they are the alignment, the center of gravity in the room. Think about it, the most dominant men you've ever seen. Do they explain themselves? Or do they let the silence do the heavy lifting? Do they try to convert everyone? Or do they stand so firm in their energy that others begin to question their own position? Convincing someone is trying to earn a seat at their table. But Machiavelli would rather build a table, so intimidating, others beg for an invitation. This is the shift, the moment you stop speaking to be understood, and instead let your stillness shape perception. Because when you let go of the need to convince, you gain something far more valuable. Control. Control of yourself. Control of the room. Control of the narrative. And ultimately, control of how others see you. Not because you forced them to, but because you made them believe it was their idea. That's the difference between power and persuasion. One demands, the other submits. And the second you try to convince, no matter how noble your intent, you've already knelt. Power doesn't explain itself. That's the law most people will never grasp, because they're too busy trying to look reasonable, too busy making sure they're liked, understood, accepted. But acceptance is for equals. Power doesn't ask for understanding, it assumes it, and if it's not given, it doesn't flinch, it doesn't bend, it doesn't break character just to be clearer. Machiavelli understood this before the modern world turned explanation into a virtue. He saw what it really was, a soft plea to be validated, and nothing ruins presence like the stench of desperation. When a king gives an order, he doesn't follow it up with paragraphs. When a general moves troops, he doesn't pause to explain the strategy to the crowd. The power is in the act, not in the justification. Only the unsure feel the need to explain. Only the ones looking up try to convince. And the moment you start doing that, you've told the world exactly where you stand, beneath them. Watch the dynamics in any group, any boardroom, negotiation, confrontation, even a quiet social setting. Who talks the most? Who clarifies? Who nervously adds context? It's rarely the one with real authority. It's the one trying to earn it. And every word they add, every extra layer of context, is a whisper saying, "Please believe me." But the man who doesn't need to be believed doesn't say much. He knows his weight isn't in his volume, it's in his presence, in what he doesn't say. The silence between his words becomes a statement. The pauses, the restraint, the calm, all of it forces people to lean in, to guess, to read between the lines. And that guessing, that uncertainty, that's where the real power lives. Not in the clarity, not in the detail, but in the question mark they can't resolve. Because power isn't about being understood, it's about being undeniable. You'll hear people say, "But if I don't explain, they'll get the wrong idea." Let them. That's not your burden. In fact, let them misunderstand you on purpose. Let them think you're arrogant, detached, difficult. That's better than them thinking they figured you out, because the man who can be explained is the man who can be dismissed. But the man who remains unspoken, unreadable, he lingers in people's minds long after the conversation ends. They replay what you said, they analyze your silence, they wonder what you meant, and in that space, they build your legend. They inflate it, they make it larger than it really is. That's the leverage. Not what you tell them, but what they tell themselves when you say nothing. Machiavelli didn't trust words to carry power. He trusted silence. He trusted posture. He trusted the quiet conviction of a man who doesn't need to prove anything. That kind of presence is felt, not explained. And once you learn that your words don't command power, your restraint does, you stop reaching for clarity and start weaponizing ambiguity. You don't react. You don't justify. You speak less. And when you do speak, every word lands like steel. Because when power walks into the room, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wave or smile or plead to be known. It just is. And everyone else adjusts. The moment you try to convince someone, you've already handed them the frame. You've told them, without knowing it, that their approval matters, that their opinion sits above your certainty, that they hold the mirror in which your image depends. And that right there is the switch. Because once you play that game, you're no longer operating from a place of strength. You're operating from reaction, from submission, from a deep-seated belief that if they don't agree with you, you lose something: respect, status, reputation. But here's the Machiavellian truth. When you give someone the power to validate you, you've given them the power to destroy you, because now they own the frame. And whoever owns the frame owns the outcome. This is why people who argue never win. Not really. Maybe they land a few points. Maybe they walk away thinking they were clever. But what they don't see is the deeper loss, the quiet, invisible transfer of authority. They were pulled into someone else's court, forced to play by someone else's rules. They didn't walk into the room and set the terms. They followed. And when you follow, even if you win the debate, you've still accepted that you needed one. Machiavelli would see it instantly. He would see the hunger to be agreed with, the emotional attachment to being right, and he would mark it as weakness, because power doesn't need consensus. It doesn't beg for understanding. It sets the tone and walks away. Think about what convincing actually is. It's a form of begging. A polite, intellectual form, sure, but begging all the same. You're trying to pull someone into your way of thinking. You're offering evidence, logic, emotion, tools of persuasion. But in doing so, you reveal your need. And need is never respected. Need signals dependence. It shows the other person that their belief in you would mean everything. And that's the loss. Because now they see your worth as something they can grant or deny. That's not power. That's performance. The Machiavellian doesn't try to convince. He makes a statement, calm, unshaken, without apology. He doesn't ask for agreement. He makes agreement feel like the only rational option. And if someone pushes back, he doesn't resist. He lets them talk, lets them expend energy, lets them dig the hole deeper. Because once you learn that the loudest person loses control, you start choosing stillness. You let your presence carry the message. You let your conviction do the work. And you never ever show that you need to be understood. Because needing to be understood is a cage. And every time you try to clarify your position, you tighten the bars. So when someone challenges you, questions your choice, mocks your position, don't try to bring them to your side. Don't argue, don't explain. Just let them sit in their own certainty. Let them speak. Let them think they've won. Because while they're fighting for dominance, you're holding the real power, the power of detachment. And that's the only frame that matters. The one they can't touch. The one you never gave away. Let them misunderstand you. Let them talk. Let them spin whatever version of you they need to feel in control. To feel clever. To feel righteous. Don't correct them. Don't chase after their misperception with frantic clarifications and emotional explanations. That's what they expect. That's what they're prepared for. Because the moment they misunderstand you and you rush to fix it, they know they've got you. They know you care. And that alone tells them they're winning. It doesn't matter if you're right. It doesn't matter if they twisted your words, ignored your intent, or deliberately tried to distort the picture. The second you start cleaning it up, you've already stepped into the trap. You've told them their version of you matters more than your version of you. That's the fatal mistake. That's when the power shifts. Because now you're not leading the narrative. You're trying to repair it. And leaders don't repair narratives, they become them. Most people can't handle being misunderstood. It hits something primal, the need to be seen correctly, the fear of being judged unfairly. But that fear is a weakness, and Machiavelli would tell you that weakness, once exposed, is never forgotten. The need to be understood is a hunger that others will feed off of. It makes you reactive. It makes you predictable. It makes you manipulable. Because if someone knows that all they have to do to control you is misinterpret you, twist your words, or play dumb, they'll use it every time. And you'll keep walking into it thinking that if you just explain better, try harder, find the perfect phrase, they'll finally get it. They won't, because the goal was never to understand. The goal was to unbalance you, and it worked. So flip the game. When someone misrepresents you, don't fight it. Let them. Let them talk like they know who you are. Let them paint you in the colors that make them feel safe, and say nothing. Or better yet, respond with calm detachment. A small shrug, a quiet, if that's how you see it. No sarcasm, no defense, just stillness. The kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable, because they were hoping for resistance. They wanted to see you squirm, and now they're left holding a version of you you haven't acknowledged. They have to carry it, they have to explain it, they have to make it stick, all while you stand untouched. This is where power lives, not in being understood, but in being untouchable. The Machiavellian knows that a misunderstood man is dangerous. He's unpredictable. He makes people second-guess themselves. They don't know where he stands, what he's thinking, what he'll do next. That mystery is worth more than all the clarity in the world, because once you let them misunderstand you and remain unbothered, they begin to question their own perception. They start asking, did I go too far? Was I wrong? Why didn't he correct me? And now the burden is on them. You never had to argue. You never had to justify. You just let their confidence dissolve in the silence of your restraint. That's the quiet dominance Machiavelli mastered. Not the man who corrects the record, but the one who lets the record burn while he builds his own in the shadows. Clarity is for the weak. That's the part no one tells you. They preach transparency, honesty, openness, as if these things are currency in the realm of power. They're not. They're currency for approval, for safety, for comfort, but not for control. Power doesn't live in what's understood. It lives in what's felt but never fully seen. In mystery, in the unknown, in the space between what you say and what you don't. And Machiavelli understood this with terrifying precision. He knew that the most dangerous man in any room isn't the loud one, the likable one, or even the smartest one. It's the one you can't read, the one you can't predict, the one who makes you fill in the blanks. Because your mind, when left without answers, always imagines something bigger, colder, more capable. That's how myth is born, not from facts but from silence. People think that being clear earns trust. It doesn't. It earns comfort, and comfort is the enemy of respect. When they feel like they know everything about you, they stop watching. They stop fearing. They stop calculating. And that's when your presence loses its edge, because nothing is more forgettable than someone who's already been figured out. The Machiavellian never allows himself to be fully seen, not because he's hiding, but because he knows the value of the unknown. He knows that mystery makes people cautious. It forces them to assume. It forces them to question themselves instead of questioning you. And when they don't know what you'll do next, they move slower. They speak softer. They think twice before they act. That's the effect of power wrapped in ambiguity. You ever notice how the most magnetic people are the ones who say less, who pause before they speak, who leave things unsaid, unfinished, unresolved? That's not laziness. That's design. They've learned that the silence between words carries more weight than the words themselves, because silence creates tension, and tension makes people focus. It makes them lean in. It makes them read too much into everything you do. That's where control comes from. Not by being explicit, but by being unreadable. And the less they know, the more they wonder. The more they wonder, the more they watch. And now you've flipped the entire dynamic. They're trying to understand you. They're trying to predict you. They're trying to earn your clarity while you give them nothing. Machiavelli would never advise you to be an open book. He'd tell you to be a locked vault. Let them hear the echo of your presence, not the details of your thoughts. Let them guess what you meant, wonder what you're planning, doubt what they thought they understood. And when they press for clarity, you give them the kind of response that feels like an answer, but leaves them with more questions. Maybe. Time will tell. That's one way to see it. These aren't evasions, they're weapons. They don't satisfy, they stir. And that stirring, that's what makes you unforgettable. Because in a world where everyone is trying to be seen, the one who refuses to be fully known becomes the one everyone watches. Everyone thinks if they just find the perfect words, they can win. If they speak with enough passion, enough logic, enough force, they'll finally break through. They think arguments are about truth. They think debates are about clarity. But Machiavelli knew better. He knew that the second you enter an argument, you've already lost. Not because you're wrong, but because now you're fighting for a verdict. And the one who fights for a verdict is not the one holding the gavel. That's the trap. Arguments feel like battlefields, but they're really performances. And when you argue, you're not commanding the stage. You're dancing for it. It's not about who's right. It never was. It's about who owns the frame. And the one who tries to win the argument has already stepped inside someone else's frame. They've accepted the premise. They've accepted the role. They've accepted that their value is now determined by whether or not they can outtalk, outprove, outmaneuver someone else. And in doing so, they've handed over the one thing that mattered: composure. Because once you're emotionally invested in being understood, in being proven right, you start reacting. You start chasing. You start explaining. And with every sentence you're telling them, "You're important enough for me to need your agreement." Machiavelli would see it like blood in the water. The man who argues may win the words, but he loses the room. Because while he's fighting to be seen as right, the other man, the one who stays still, the one who doesn't flinch, starts to look like he doesn't need the fight. And that alone makes him look stronger. People don't remember who made the better point. They remember who looked more certain, who stayed composed, who walked away without needing the last word. That's the real game, not intellectual victory, psychological dominance. And that doesn't come from winning. It comes from being unshakable. Think about it. You've seen it before. Two people go back and forth. One's louder, faster, more emotional. He's got data, he's got energy, he's got righteous anger. The other one just watches. Maybe he says one or two things. Maybe he says nothing. But everyone notices him because his lack of need speaks volumes. And after the noise settles, people feel it. He didn't chase the win. He didn't beg for agreement. He didn't try to convince. He just was. And that's what lingers. Machiavelli wouldn't waste his breath trying to change someone's mind. He'd let their mind destroy itself. He understood that people are not persuaded by arguments. They're persuaded by presence, by posture, by perception. And when you understand that, you stop needing to be right and start choosing to be powerful. You let others argue while you conserve energy. You let them speak while you observe. You don't correct them. You let them overextend. Because the one who tries to prove everything ends up proving one thing: that they needed the argument more than they needed control. And when that becomes visible, the crowd stops listening to the words and starts watching the man. And in that shift, power silently changes hands. There's a strange thing that happens when you try too hard to be heard. People stop listening. The louder you get, the more they tune you out. The more passionately you argue your side, the more they lean back, arms folded, waiting for you to burn out. Why? Because effort smells like desperation, and desperation is weakness. Machiavelli knew this before anyone. He knew that people aren't drawn to those who try hard to be believed. They're drawn to those who don't need to be. The man who speaks with urgency may sound committed, but the man who speaks with attachment sounds certain. And certainty, especially when it's quiet, has gravity. You can feel it. In every conversation where you're pushing to be understood, there's a moment where your energy changes. You stop speaking for yourself and start speaking for them. You shape your words around what they'll accept. You soften your edge to avoid offense. You repeat yourself to make sure it landed. And somewhere in that shift, you've lost control. Because now your words aren't a declaration. They're a performance. You're not speaking truth. You're trying to sell it. And Machiavelli would call that a mistake. Because the man who tries to sell belief never had the confidence to command it. Watch people when someone disagrees with them. Most get tense. They talk faster. They raise their voice or stack their reasoning. They don't even notice what they're revealing, that they need to be agreed with, that they're invested in the outcome. And anyone who's invested is vulnerable. But the man who doesn't care if you believe him, that man becomes dangerous. Not because he's aggressive, not because he's loud, but because he clearly doesn't need you. And in a world full of people performing for acceptance, that kind of detachment is power. It's psychological warfare. And the weapon is your own restraint. While others throw emotional hooks, you stay cold. While they rant, you stay composed. While they try to prove themselves, you simply exist. That's what makes people shift in their seat. That's what makes them question their own tone. Because deep down, people expect resistance. They expect you to react. They expect to fight. But when you don't give it to them, their momentum dies. The wind leaves their sails. And now they're standing there, animated and exposed, while you sit still, unreadable, untouchable. That's the shift. That's when domination becomes silent. And it only happens when you stop trying to convince, when you stop chasing clarity, when you speak not to change their mind, but to assert your own. Not with volume, not with fire, but with cool, unshaken energy. Say less, say it slower, and if you must say something, say it once. Then let it breathe, let it land. Let the silence stretch until it becomes uncomfortable, because that's when the power transfers, when they realize you're not afraid of being misunderstood. You're not afraid of being disliked. You're not even afraid of being wrong. You're just not afraid. And that's what people feel, not your words, your weight, your calm refusal to beg for belief. That's the energy that dominates. Quietly, fully, completely. There's a difference between being calm and being detached. One is emotional control. The other is psychological armor. Most people can fake calm. They can lower their voice, breathe deeply, hold back the panic. But detachment, true detachment, that's something else. It's the absence of need. It's the absence of chase. It's when you no longer seek approval, agreement, understanding, or even recognition. You show up, you speak when it matters, and you let everything else fall where it falls. That's the space Machiavelli lived in, not caring if they applauded or accused, because when you move from calm to detached, your presence becomes cold steel, untouchable, unmoved. You don't convince, you don't defend, you simply exist in a state of complete internal control, and people feel that in their bones. When someone says something meant to provoke you, and you don't even blink, something strange happens. The room shifts. The tension doesn't land where they expected. It circles back and sits on their own shoulders. They start to feel the weight of their own performance. They realize they're the only one trying to prove something. And when you're truly detached, you don't even feel the need to enjoy their discomfort. That's how far past reaction you are. That's when people stop trying to push your buttons, because they finally realize you don't have any. In every interaction, someone is chasing and someone is leading. The one who chases wants something: agreement, validation, emotional resolution. The one who leads, he doesn't chase anything. He creates gravity. He lets others orbit around him. And Machiavelli knew this. The man who tries to convince is always chasing. The man who doesn't care if he's believed is always leading. Because when you're detached, you're no longer managing perception. You're commanding space. And nothing terrifies the average person more than someone who has nothing to prove. Because they can't control you. They can't bait you. They can't shake you. And without those levers, they feel powerless. That's the paradox. The less you try to control the conversation, the more you end up controlling it. Not by force, not by argument, but by refusing to play. And when you don't play, they start folding their cards, one by one. You don't need to outwit them. You don't need to outtalk them. You just need to stay still while they unravel, because they will. People always unravel in the face of unshakable detachment. They over-explain, they escalate, they fill the silence, and every word they say becomes a sign of their imbalance, while you sit there, untouched by their noise, not cold, just unbothered, not passive, just indifferent to approval. Machiavelli would tell you this is the final form of power, not aggression, not dominance, not even silence, but detachment, because detachment means nothing holds you, nothing binds you, and a man who needs nothing cannot be threatened. When you reach that level, the world stops looking at you as someone to argue with. It starts looking at you as something to respect, or fear, or follow, and all without saying a word. The highest position in any power game isn't the man who speaks the most. It's not the one with the best arguments, the flashiest delivery, or the deepest reasoning. It's the man who speaks last, if at all. The man who waits, watches, and lets the noise exhaust itself. And when he finally moves, it isn't to convince, it's to end. That's the final shift, the reversal. You stop being the one who tries to win others over, and you become the one they try to win over. You stop chasing agreement, and agreement begins to chase you. Not because you demanded it, but because your silence, your restraint, Your refusal to plead your case created an aura they can't ignore. People need certainty, and when you offer none but carry yourself like you own it, they begin to project strength onto you. They begin to follow not because you asked, but because they don't want to be left behind. That's the final form of silent domination. You don't push your way into belief. You make belief rise around you. You become the standard, the fixed point, the one who isn't trying to move the crowd, but forces the crowd to orient themselves around you. Machiavelli understood that the most powerful man is the one who doesn't flinch when misunderstood, doesn't blink when accused, and doesn't correct when distorted. Because that man, by refusing to defend or convince, forces the world to guess, to fill in the blanks. And people don't fill those blanks with weakness. They fill them with danger, with competence, with control. That's how myths are made. Not by giving answers, but by leaving space. You become the reference point, the one others compare themselves to, the one whose silence makes others talk more, explain more, try harder. And the more they try, the more you look like the one in control. Because you're not struggling to be seen. You are seen, you're not performing. You're simply standing. And that alone makes the ground tilt in your favor. It's not charisma. It's not intelligence. It's presence. The kind of presence that can't be faked, because it's built brick by brick in the fire of self-restraint. You held your tongue when you could have argued. You stayed still when you could have reacted. You let go of being liked and found something better, being respected. That's what makes people lean in. That's what makes them change their tone. That's what makes them chase your approval without even knowing why. Because you've stepped out of the emotional economy they live in. You've stopped trading in the currency of validation. And now you're not one of them. You're above them. Not in arrogance, but in stillness. And stillness, when held without apology, becomes a force. The man who no longer tries to convince doesn't just stop explaining, he becomes the explanation. His silence becomes his authority. His indifference becomes his weapon. And the room changes not because he demands it, but because everyone else starts to feel small in the shadow of a man who needs nothing from them. That's where it ends. Not with applause, not with agreement, but with a question that lingers in their minds long after you've left. Why didn't he say more? And the answer they'll never admit, because he didn't need to.